Hello and welcome to another Random Code stream. Happy you're joining if you're doing it live or if you're watch this later. I'm going to be working on a small new feature which probably nobody should ever notice if you're using Rocks. Again, Rocks is a framework I've created to do mocking in .NET, similar to MOQ or NSubstitute, but it uses source generators to generate all the code. So with that, let me get some background music going. Excuse me. So this feature is part of a milestone 920, and I've got a couple things here that, oh wait, I need to have the desktop audio on, otherwise you would never be able to hear it. It is playing. Okay, cool. Just the beginning of this song is kind of quieter. Okay. So this new feature set is what I'm working on for Rocks 920. This one should be smaller. The next one that I want to do, and some of these I just keep pushing back because they don't have as big of a priority. And this isn't listed by priority. This is just the way it came through. But some of these I just I'd like to do it, and I just keep pushing them back and back and back. But this one, I've said to myself, I really want to do. At least I want to try doing. It's going to take a decent amount of work to get this to actually happen. So if you know C# and C#, what was it? Can't remember what version. Was it 11? Maybe 10? But they added the ability to put static abstract members on interfaces, which is kind of weird, but that's supported. And right now, Rocks doesn't let you do it for various reasons. I would like to support it. I put in some design work thinking it can be done, but there's going to be a decent amount of work to make it happen and to make sure it's actually doing the right thing. This one is kind of an obscure thing in Rocks, but it's something that I noticed, and as I was doing some work fixing an issue. I think I fixed this issue on a previous stream. I started noticing this, and I was like, hey, wait a minute. To fix the issue, all I have to do is make sure that this doesn't do anything. And then that got me thinking, hey, wait a minute. These shims shouldn't actually be called at all. And they were wondering, what's a shim? Well, it's a weird thing, but it allows me to say, hey, if I have a method on an interface that has an implementation, which this does, it doesn't have the semicolon here. Now the implementation doesn't do anything, but this has a body. This is saying that this method has a default implementation. And so what I put in Rocks was a way to say, hey, if you call that method and you haven't set up an expectation, that's okay. We'll call the base one for you. We'll call the one on the interface, but you can't say base dot. You can't do that in C# to call a default interface implementation. That's just not the way it works. They actually have an issue out to add that support, but nothing's been done with it. So what you end up having to do is I create these objects called shims, and they in turn implement the same interface the mock is. But what they implement are things that do not have default implementations. So in this case, you see the property ends up here, but the consume method doesn't. And so this one trick lets you actually call that implementation, because this will call the default one because it wasn't implemented on that shim type. In this property, you notice we never call the shim implementation of the property, and we shouldn't. There's no reason to. So that got me thinking, instead of passing in the mock, which we're really not using for anything, maybe what we should do is throw an exception. What I'll probably throw is a not supported exception. But make it explicit. If you call anything on a shim, that was a mistake. I did something in Rocks to make it so that I inadvertently called something. That's the thought anyway. We shouldn't be calling these. So make it explicit that if they end up being called, an exception's being thrown. So that's the work I want to do this morning. What I'll end up doing is I'll do the work, and then I'll run one or two of the tests that I currently have around shims. There's this one class that has a couple of tests around it. I will then run the integration tests, cogeneration tests, and then there will be probably a handful of tests in the unit tests that will break because the implementation here is going to change. And so I just have to go back and change the code, which maybe won't take too long. I may be able to get that all done in this stream. I've got about an hour or so to get work done. So this feature or this little change shouldn't be a lot of work, but I've said that before with things that I do in this library, and then I end up trying to change stuff, and wow, it becomes a big mess. So hopefully that doesn't happen here, but we'll see. All right, so we go into the builders here. We'll go into the shim. And this is all good. What we want to go into is all of these methods now. Let's close these out. And basically say, like for a method, when I build it, doing all this is still necessary because we still need to get the signature of the method correct. That has to be there. It's just the implementation, which is somewhere down here. Yeah, I think that's what we're doing here. So, trying to see, what do we do for a method? Let me go into generators here. Generate abstract, create async. Yeah, so this one does. So we're just doing, like if we need to call this, we're putting it on the next line. Now if we have properties, we do that. So somewhere in here, here we go. Yeah, here we go. Because we have to put the constraints before we do that. And then this is what we need to change. We need to say writer.writeLine. And actually, you can probably just do it as a string. And then we do a ++ indentation. Right, okay. Because we want it on the next. Okay, that makes sense. So we want to say throw new global system.not supported exception. Shim members should not be invoked. There. So it's a little unfortunate that we still have to generate all this code, but it's... oh, and then here, what we need to say is... Yeah, this is going to change a couple of other things too. So we inherit from this. We no longer take this. And we don't need... We don't need to define a constructor because the default no argument constructor will be made. We also have to look at where we're actually calling the shim to create it. Because if you look like in the test, somewhere, I think when I say, that's a lot of code. Yeah, here. So when we actually create the mock, we end up putting, so we can take that, we'll be able to take this off. We'll be able to remove that expectations thing. So that will be nice. But one step at a time. Okay, so we did the method. Let's grab this because we're going to use the same thing everywhere. The builder method, now we can go to properties. And we can say get. Well, this is going to be a little different because we want to say this. Right, but that's not what we want to do. We can get rid of that, do that, and then put that there. And now this isn't being used by anything, right? And so we can say the same thing here now for set, and the same thing for an init. Init. There we go. Okay. I believe, yeah, we have to put that there too. So all this stuff, again, has to be done because of reasons. So let's actually just grab this. So that's the property, indexers. Again, we can get rid of that now. And we make this... Actually, we can just grab what we did here. That'd be simpler. And then this is that, and this is that. Julinx, hopefully I'm saying that right. Good morning. What are you doing? I am working on a small little improvement on this library that I've created. So this library is called Rocks. You can go to github.com. The actual link to the thing I'm working on is in the description of the stream, so you can click on that if you want. And that'll take you to the repo, and that will get you all sorts of information. Basically, this library is a mocking library in .NET, similar to MLQ or Unsubstitute. So I'm making a small change on something that I do internally. So a little bit, kind of a very small improvement, mostly in terms of enforcing something that shouldn't happen. We shouldn't be calling these things. And so I'm changing it so that it's explicit to throw an exception if we call them, because they should never be called. So that's what's going on here. All right, so that's indexers. Events, the last one. So, yeah, the event is a little interesting because we're not doing an explicit implementation in certain cases. We're just saying we have to declare the event here, but we don't do anything with it. In this case, we're saying we build an explicit implementation for it. I'm inclined to take the wording here. Let's get rid of the event here. We no longer need a field name. We can do this, which is basically saying these should never happen. Now with this one, though, we don't do anything when events exist. And so, yeah, we just say, there's your event. We don't really care about we don't really care about what it actually does. And I forget why this pragma's here. but I put it there for a reason, I guess. The explicit implementation, I think, is here for... yeah, if you actually need an explicit implementation. What I could do here is also... the explicit thing is just saying... how do I describe this? Let's come back up here. Like, let's just say I have this interface, okay? And I come back here, and I do this. Yes, yes, you're barking. Let's get rid of that. Yeah, you want comments. So now make a public class X, which implements iDialog service. Okay. So it's implemented. And that's all you need to do. Now I could say implement it explicitly. Okay, that's just an explicit implementation. That's what we're actually doing down here with the name. But you notice we do add and remove here. If I don't do that, but you can add that in. You can say add, throw new exception, and remove, throw new exception. And that's perfectly fine. And I think that's what I want to do here. I want to do the same thing that I'm... so let's say write lines. Okay. And then... no. Let's do that. So now let's change everything in here. No, not current. I was highlighting this. Oh my God. Selection. Oh my God, what is up with this thing? Selection. Change. No, what are you... that. Thank you. Jeez. That was more pain than was needed. Okay, so we want that. And then we'll put... and add or remove. And be explicit that this should not be invoked either. There. Okay. That works. I don't know why I do these two slightly different. I think because it's implemented explicitly, we don't put like public there or not. We just do it in explicit implementation. And then the event name's there, and then that's the name of the... yeah, that's the name of the event. Either way, it is what it is. Okay, so now that should be all of these. And now we got to come back to... get rid of indexer, that. But when we generate the mock, we have to change that now. Yeah, we no longer need to have... No, we do. That's right. We still need to keep that. I was being wrong. I was being stupid. So if I have an abstract create here and I go into here, no, we still need to pass this in. So that doesn't change. Yeah. But when we're saying new this, we don't pass into this. That's what we need to change. Okay. So we have the constructor here. We say base. Now we say field setters. So somewhere in this god-awful mess. Here. We don't have to do that anymore. All right. So, if everything went as planned, a test like this should no longer do that. We don't need this anymore. We don't need that anymore. If I come into one of these, I just want to grab that throw code. So that should now say this. Should say that. And should say that. All right. Okay. So we changed that. Yeah, okay. Okay. Group Discord page? I don't have one for my YouTube channel. Wasn't planning on making one either, so... I do have a Discord page for for rocks. There's a server if you want to join that. All right, so let's run this test. One failed. Okay. What failed? Oh, good. Okay. So it looks like I just missed something. Let's... see it down here. That'll be much easier to... Oh. There's an actual space there? That's it. Which, fine, that makes sense. It, So when we're generating the shim... Oh, we're putting a... We're putting a line there. I think. Yeah. That's where that's coming from. It doesn't break anything. It just ends up looking ugly. Because what it's saying is, well, you're generating, if I come down here, something that basically method builder. It'd be on the same indent, I think, as this. I love Marshall lamps. I think you're the first one that ever actually noticed that's behind me. Yeah, that's a... you don't see it, but in the rest of my room, I've played music for virtually all my life. So at least 40 years. I've been playing some kind of musical instrument. Guitar is actually the one I played the most, but I've also played bass guitar. I can play keyboards. I'm very rudimentary at it, but I can do basic chordings and play along with it and stuff. And I have a drum set over there as well. And that I picked up when I found a used Gibson Les Paul. I'm still not convinced it's an actual original, like a real one. I think it's a knockoff. I think it's a fake. But I'm not sure. It plays fine. It plays decently, but it's also not the greatest thing in the world. So I'm thinking it might be a knockoff. But when I bought that, I got that amp, and I didn't notice until I got home that if you look at all the knobs, they go to 11. So they have the Spinal Tap reference to it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. So it's interesting, too, with music, and especially with guitars and basses and stuff, that a lot of people have switched over to like neural DSP or fractal amps, or basically digital processing, to basically be their amplifier. You still see people like John Petrucci from Dream Theater. He still has Mesa Boogie. I actually I have it. It's below the Marshall amp. I have a Mesa Boogie amp, and I love their sound. But that amp is so old, and it's started to have some problems with it. And I've had the tubes changed on it a couple of times, but it just sometimes it ends up sounding weird, for lack of a better term. And it's kind of sad, because I really, really do like Mesa Boogie sounds. But the thing about digital processing and using like fractal amps or neural DSP or whatever is it's much easier to tour with that. You don't need the big amp. You don't need all the problems that can go on with amps. And it's very convenient. You can also just end up doing so much exploration of sounds and textures and things like that. So it's really interesting to see, as a guitarist, learning in the early 1980s, how that landscape has evolved to the point that we're at right now. I have a JCM 800. Yeah. Okay. Mine's a dual caliber DC3, and I got that in 1995. So it shows you how old that one is. And then I have a couple of PRSs. I love Paul Reed Smith. They're amazing guitars. And I wanted to get, because I had I still have a couple of Charvels from when I was in high school, because, speed metal, and I had the big hair. And I liked the Charvels that I had, but I wanted something that didn't have a tremolo bar. And when I got out of college and I was living on my own and, was getting more financially solvent or consistent, I decided to upgrade a little bit. So I bought a PRS and that amp, and PRS guitars are just fantastic. I absolutely love PRSs. If you're a guitarist and you're wanting to try something out that's good, that's one of them. I stand by Paul Reed Smith. I'll be endorsed by Paul Reed Smith on my channel. If they would send me an endorsement, I would love to have a custom-made Paul Reed Smith. That'd be the dream. But there's such a thing as money. Anyway, I'm getting off of the code stream part of this. So Okay, well, the way to get around this is if I go to like property. Am I doing the same thing with properties? Yeah, I'm putting a line in above because I want it to be spaced after. What I could do is only put a space before I do the implementation, a line, if I'm not the first one. The first one would not do that. And then that should... well, the problem with that too, though, is... Yeah, it worked before because I had that junk where I had the field and the constructor here, and that's no longer there. So it's just I'm trying to prettify something that it really doesn't need to be pretty. You know, is it worth all the changing in code just so that I avoid having an extra line here? Probably not. I mean, I have the case here too, where I have 2 lines showing up, and I've never gone back and fixed it because it doesn't matter. Nobody sees this, you know. And while I try to be cleanish with the code that I'm generating in a source generator, I also don't try to worry too much. I mean, at some point, if I ever get time, I'll go back and potentially clean some of this up because there's a couple little inconsistencies. Like, I would like to have a space here, and again, 2 spaces there. But nobody cares because you don't see this when you're using the stuff from a source generator. So yeah, let's just leave it this way. And what might break when I run it now is that I might have like too much space indentation. Yeah, I think that's the problem, which is a simple thing to fix. Oh. Oh, not support. Oh my god, it's supported. Why am I not getting scroll? Oh my god, what? Well, that's annoying. That's happened before too, where the scroll wheel doesn't work. So let's just go into here now. Yeah, see now for some reason scrolls, but let me actually just oh, it's everything. It's not just Visual Studio. So unfortunately, I'm just gonna have to go on the struggle bus with this and deal with not having a scroll. This has happened, I think, once before, where just something bugs out and it doesn't, and the scroll just stops, so I have to reboot my entire computer. It's rare. But like, it still works. You can still see it moving around and stuff. It just, and like, I can go side to side, but it's not scrolling up and down. So I don't know. Once I'm done with the stream, I'll have to reboot my computer and see if scrolling comes back. Okay, and then this one. Oh, they're up here. Okay. By the way, bring up music. When I play music during my coding streams, like you're hearing in the background, that's music I've written and played. So I actually haven't recorded anything in a long time. And that's one of the things I want to start doing is start recording some music and putting it out there again. I just haven't done it in years. Other things have taken my interest. I still play. I'll still pick up a guitar and play, but I just I haven't sat down and actually tried to write stuff and put and compose stuff. So I want to fix that. I want to change that. But these songs that you're hearing are four that I pick and I just play them on a loop. And they're instrumentals from stuff I recorded when I was in college. And then a friend of mine, Mike Hodnick, he actually goes by Kindome. And he fell into the electronic live coding music space. And that's what he does. But we met like in 2004 and we ended up working on basically creating two, I call them albums, but sets of music, and just wrote stuff together and produced it. But then he wanted to do the electronic stuff, which I really don't have an interest in at all. So the song that just played, that's one that we wrote together. And then the one that's about to play is one I did in college on a small demo tape. And then the other three are ones that we did as instrumentals. So it's just some background music, but it's actually me playing all the stuff, mostly. On the instrumentals, Mike would end up playing like the drums on all of them, because that's what his forte was. Anyway, so that's supported. So that's good. We don't care about it here. Let's just make sure that I've got this. Man, when you don't have a mouse, it's like it suddenly becomes... Or scrolling ability on mouse, I'll just have to tab up and down. Like an absolute caveman. Okay, so that's all good now. So if I go to here, now we shouldn't get that error. And it works. Okay, good. What I want to do now is, let's just see for the analysis tests. These are my unit tests. How many will break? It shouldn't be a lot because I don't have a ton of tests around this shim stuff. It's about 5 or 10 is what I expect to break. We'll see. And they'll break because the code that's been generated has changed, so it's just saying, hey, these don't match anymore. So seven. So I said 5 to 10, so I was actually not too far off. All right, so let's see. Before I do that, though, let's do the shutdown startup again, because I do have an integration test. I should have some shim tests. At least I have one, which is better than nothing, I guess. That's actually... That's surprising that I only have one test in my integration test for that. I'm a bad person. I'll shore that up. But what I want to make sure is that at least the tests that I wrote there are all passing. Like what I just did shouldn't break anything. And I picked these songs just to have as background so something's going on when I'm not talking, but also I didn't want to run into any copyright infringement or anything like that. Oh, 3 failed. Really? Oh boy. Oh. Well, this is why we have tests, right? Now, not all of these are failing. Some of these are okay. Like the indexer one is okay. Property in a class. Yeah, it's the one that has the so we call virtual, yeah, okay. So we're saying get perimeter because the method polygon has a get perimeter implementation, and we don't set a expectation on it, which makes sense. We're running into the case here too where the code is actually generated, but because of the way source generators work at times within Visual Studio, it thinks the code isn't actually accessible, which really sucks. Because then I can't actually get to, there we go. Okay. So now if I dive into this, if I could scroll, that would be so nice. So the problem is that we can call here get perimeter, but the problem is that what's ending that's great. What's ending up happening is it thinks that there's an expectation on this. Was that the problem? And there shouldn't be. Let's run this again. So it fails, and why does it fail? The following verification failed on get number of sides. Expected 1, received 0. Why? That's happening in the context in the dispose. And so we're calling verify. And we're saying we expected this to be called, which it did. Yeah, this is a that is bizarre. Why does that not? And I'm betting it's not just, well, the number, wait. Yeah, it's both of them. They're both there. Okay, that makes sense. So something is messing with this. So yeah, with get perimeter, we recognize that if we set an expectation for it to be called, then we're going to go through that route. Otherwise, we're going to call the shim to call the default implementation. We know that works because we're getting 15 here. That's 3 times 5. But for number of sides, we set an expectation. If that actually didn't happen, we would have gotten this thrown. So I'm a little puzzled here. These are 1 and 2. This is hopefully also going to show the power of source generators. As an author, I can actually debug this stuff and see why these would be failing. Well, if I was actually in debug mode. Well, you think you're... Okay. Bound to... What are you talking about? Stop. Oh, whatever. Jeez. Okay. So, yeah, now that's gone. That's okay. Because we actually haven't generated it yet. God, I hope my scroll comes back when I do a when I do a reboot. I just can't do that while I'm streaming. So, oh. Why is that being invoked? Oh, that's why I do all this work. That's why I do the callbacks. I will say this for the 54,592nd time or whatever it is. This is why you write tests. Because if you do something that you think is better or you change behavior, you may break a test and it may show you why you shouldn't do that. You may be wondering, what am I talking about? Well, the reason why we have that code that calls back into the mock is for this case. This method implementation has an implementation to call the property side length and number of sides. Okay. Well, if I implement it such that they throw an exception rather than getting back to the mock and calling it, because that's where the invocation is happening. So what's happening is I'm calling get perimeter. That's ending up calling it on the shim. That in turn says get the value of those two properties. Well, that's saying do that on the shim type. If I throw an exception there, it doesn't work. So what I need to do then is actually have it thrown. Wait, how do I say this? I want it to then go back and do what I'm saying. Go back to the mock and say call it there. So that actually was completely valid. This is also a good illustration of why you have branches in code, because I can just completely nuke this branch and say that was a mistake. One thing that this is actually showing, though, that's a little odd is this fails because we're throwing an exception in the shim. But if you look at raw context, this thing that I built, that's gathering all these things here. Okay. But what happens is this is throwing an exception. And we're masking it because we have a dispose here. And the dispose is calling verify and it's throwing that exception. So that's what is actually showing up here is it's going, well, you never called these because they threw an exception. And so I'm going to report that. But that's actually not quite what, well, no, that's not what happened. What happened was I got an exception. And so this rock context thing is actually kind of interesting because in a finally, you should not throw an exception, but that's actually what I'm doing. And so this rock context is actually potentially not the greatest thing in the world for exceptions. It is if... Yeah, that can get really messy. I've actually uncovered something else too here that I'm now start going, I don't know if that's actually the right thing to do. And this may be why I didn't like having this kind of context thing around. Because I can't pick up if you've done something that causes an exception to be thrown. Yeah. This is the thing, though, that I did add this rock context in, and it did not show up because... yeah, it would be nice if there was some way to say, hey, within dispose, do you have an exception in flight? But there's no way to do that. I'll have to think this one through because I can see where if you're using this, it has the unfortunate side behavior of this could actually end up masking an assert. Like we asserted this actually threw an exception. The finally block is entered, and then in dispose, we're throwing another exception because now it thinks those expected call counts haven't been done. And so we don't know in that case that there's a previous exception. That kind of sucks. Because if we don't do this here, like let me just change this real quick. If I say do that and then I say here new, I just knew it up myself like that. Now when I run this test, it's going to fail, but it's going to fail because we're seeing that exception, and that's actually what we want. So what's going through my head is not just this, because this is going to go away. I'm going to undo what I did in the branch. But there are cases where we could throw this, where maybe we say, hey, no handlers match for this. What I might want to do is track a bit. Even that's going to be very problematic, to say the least. you may introduce a callback that throws an exception so that when the callback is invoked, that throws an exception, and I wouldn't know about that. So even that's not the greatest thing to do in the world either. Although, in that case, you're throwing an exception from a callback. That was your choice. I'm babbling about stuff that you may be sitting going, what in the hell is he talking about? In the mock, you can see here that sometimes like get perimeter. I could have a callback here and I could call it. Well, you may define a callback to throw an exception, and I wouldn't know that. But that's what I'm saying in that case is that's your expected behavior. You're writing a test with a callback to throw an exception. Because maybe you want to trigger some other code to say when an exception occurs here, I want to see this happen, and that would be expected behavior for whatever reason. That's why we increase the call count here, because we want to say, yes, that actually happened. What I want to track is cases where in the mock, we throw an exception. That's an exception that we know about. And if that happens, then within the context, what we can say is I'd have to add this in here somewhere because this is from the expectations. We would need to track this on the mock itself. Maybe what we could do is say on this.expectations, where are you? So on the expectations, we have a property here that just says, did implementation fail? I don't know what the name of it would be, but we set that there. And what we do in verify then is we say, if this was invoked, we actually created a mock and we didn't generate any exceptions. Then go through and verify, because then we'll throw an exception. And then this would here on dispose say, would just do verify as normal, but we don't verify. We only verify if we created a mock and we and the run of all the invocations did not cause an exception to occur that we know of, an unhandled exception, or that we didn't throw an exception. Again, if you throw an exception and callback, there's nothing we can really do about that. We don't know about that. Nor do we want to suppress it. We're just like, whatever you do in that, that's on you. And we're expecting you to handle it and do the right thing. But if we throw an exception, like here, this got called and you didn't set an expectation for it, so we're immediately going to throw an exception and be in your face. So we would only check verify as if we didn't. Okay, so the end result of this is this stream didn't really produce much, but it did. what I'm going to do is basically back out this branch and delete it because it's not needed. And well, yeah, it's not needed. And in fact, it breaks something that should actually work in rocks. So we need to not do my idea. But again, that shows you the power of testing, because I caught this and I didn't put that out there and then break somebody. So that's good. That's actually good. But what this actually ended up showing is, in a subtle way that I didn't anticipate, is what happens if you throw an exception when you're using the mock under test within a context. And in that case, we shouldn't do a verify, because you threw an exception somewhere, and so we don't want to raise an exception from here. Because that might, if we didn't, now what we're going to just do is go through and say, what this does down here, the verify, is it says on all of the handlers that we have, did we ever run into a case where something wasn't called? You set an expectation and it was never called. Or you set an expectation where you thought that the expected call count was going to be 3 and it was only 2. Okay, that wouldn't have caused an exception during the normal code execution, but it would here. And the reason I'm babbling about all this is because this rock context, when I built this, one thing that came into mind is that this may be very useful and almost required if you're going to do static abstract members and interfaces. Because I need a context, I need a scope to know during a test when you set expectations for static members, because the way I'm thinking of implementing that is by using async local. And so I put something into an async local, and so that async local will track for the execution of a asynchronous call flow. Now, if you're doing things synchronously on a particular task, or whatever you want to think of it as, then that will work, because it's just through that one, and I can reach up to it and find the expectations for static members. If you have tests running in parallel and you have one test running synchronously, there's 2 synchronous tests, but they're actually running in parallel on different tasks. Their asynchronous call flow, my understanding of it is that they should be separate from each other. And so they'll be able to reach up into async local context and find expectations for static members. If you do async and you go from one, your async execution flows after you do the async and await, and you continue on, it may be a different task, that async local still flows, so that it's that same thing throughout that async flow. So the reason I bring this all up is because I need a way to say, when you're done, you'd have to say, I'm done, and clear out what's in the async local, because I don't want it being reused potentially for another call flow. And so using a context here, and it might end up being, no, that wouldn't work. The context itself can't flow across the executions. I might have to put the context in the expectations, and then that's where you reach up and find. I don't know. I'm hoping that async local works the way I think it should work. So. But the point is, this may be the stopping, this may be the holy ground. And you have to, when you write a test, especially if you use a static abstract members, you need to put it in a context. So the end result of this stream is I may need to do something and change it so that we track when a mock is throwing an exception. When we are doing something like this. Not here, we don't care about the callback, that's on you. But if we've set one because we've thrown one, and of course this is going to go away, but if we've thrown one in our mock, then we don't want to mask that in the expectation. Now, you may have something where you set this to 3, you set this to 5, and then you call get perimeter, and that's fine. And then this says it should be 14. Well, the assertion's going to fail. Right? But that's the assertion here. What should happen in this case was if we said it's equal to 14, what I believe would happen is we would get that we called side length, that we called number of sides, and we turned 3 and 5. This assertion fails and says it should be 14, but we didn't think we threw a exception in our mock. And so then when we unwind and do a verify, we'd also say, yep, you called side length once. Yep, you called number of sides once. We're good. So that wouldn't mask the assertion exception that would come from NUnit or your testing framework. So that actually would be fine. Okay, so what's going to come out of this is I need to write another story or issue to say track thrown exceptions from mocks and check and rock context or something like that. And I might do that tomorrow morning. I was going to do something else tomorrow morning, but I think that would be the next thing to work on because I really need that to be shored up. So with that, I'm going to stop the stream and then reboot my computer. And then hopefully tomorrow morning, I'll work on that little fix for rock context. So with that, if you've been watching either during the stream or if you watch this in the future, I appreciate that either way. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. I am going to be doing also some streaming this weekend, playing Hollow Knight and continuing that live playthrough of that game. I'm enjoying it. I do get frustrated at times, like especially when I'm fighting the big baddies, the big bosses, because I'm older. My reaction times are not as good. So it does get frustrating at times with that. But overall, I am enjoying the game, and I will be doing some streams with that today, this afternoon or evening, and tomorrow afternoon and or evening. So with that, I am done with this stream. So thank you all for watching. Take care, and I hope to see you in the future.